How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Zone Defense. I'm Drew, joined as always by my co-host Chris. Be sure to follow us on Spotify at Zone Defense Podcast, on Instagram at Zone Defense Podcast, on Twitter at Zone Defense Pod, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Zone Defense Podcast. And be sure to ring that bell to get post notifications. Chris, what are we doing today?
Today we're going to go into our top 25 fantasy running backs for the 2020 season. You know, it's going to be a crazy season with COVID going around and all these players opting out. So I'm sure some of these are going to change. Already, we had some big news with Damian Williams. You know, he opted out. So I think that's going to reflect on both of our rankings. So I'm really excited to see where you have, in particular, the Kansas City starting running back. I don't want to spoil where we got him, but I'm particularly excited about that. And just the rest of the list on here. You know, this is running backs are the mainstay of your fantasy team. You're going to have to draft these guys really early in drafts. So we're going to try to break down which ones you should take and which ones you should try to avoid kind of in the early rounds based on our rankings.
Yeah, I think running back, obviously quarterback's the most popular position, but in terms of fantasy, running back is probably the most popular to talk about because receivers this year especially, it seems like they're very deep, so you could wait on a receiver. But running back, and we'll talk about it like you said here in a little bit, but there is like significant tiers. Like there's tier breaks. Receivers, there's obviously the big guys, but it kind of you can wait on a receiver and still be in a really good spot. But running backs, depending on who you get, if you wait too long, you might be kind of screwed. So I'm really looking forward to this. We had a quarterback one a few weeks ago, and as soon as we finished recording that one, I was like, we need to do a running back one. I know it's old school, but I got an Adrian Peterson jersey on right now. I know it's not 2009, and he probably isn't on your rankings, but who knows? We got maybe he's your number one guy. But how about you jump into your number one guy right here?
Well, the number one guy, it's going to go ahead and be an absolute no-brainer. I'm sure you'll have him as your number one guy as well, and we're going to type it right into here. It's Christian McCaffrey for me. You know, he's just a very well-rounded back in general. I know he's in a new system now, so there's a little bit more risk to his season exactly, but other than that, he's just a dynamic player. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, as I kind of put right there in my box as well. He is the number one guy for me. We're doing, I think we forgot to mention there at the top, we're doing this is for full PPR. When you take into account his rushing and his receiving, I believe last year he was the only receiver to get over 1,000 yards. Austin Eckler was 993 right behind him. But when you mix in his rushing ability, 1,300 yards, and then receiving ability, like I said, over 1,000 yards, he's just a beast. Got 116 receptions last year. And an offense where I think Kyle Allen was like the main quarterback. And regardless of what your thoughts are on Teddy Bridgewater, he is definitely an upgrade. So
absolutely,
McCaffrey is an easy choice here with your number one pick, and it's probably going to be first overall in most of, if not every single league you draft in. Of course, every year there is that guy who takes Tom Brady first overall, but unless you're one of those leagues, McCaffrey is probably going to go first.
Yeah, Christian McCaffrey, he's just an obvious number one pick, as I already said. He's in a tier of his own, and I'm going to kind of list I kind of did a little tier-based ranking as well in my side, but he's in a tier by himself. He's in tier one. He's an absolute monster, and even if he has a little bit of regression in the touchdown department this year, I don't think it's going to matter. He's going to get the ball so much through the air and on the ground. He's going to have the highest workload of any running back in totality, and I believe with Teddy Bridgewater, he should open up a little bit more running lanes. Maybe he'll have a couple more goal line touchdowns. I think this offense, while their team is going to stink because that defense is so bad, I think this offense is actually going to be pretty fun to watch. With him, DJ Moore, you got Curtis Samuel, you got Robbie Anderson. Obviously, like we said, Teddy Bridgewater, a big-time upgrade at the quarterback position, regardless of what you think of him. I think this offense is gonna hum. I think they're going to be in the upper half of the entire league, and he's the best player on what I'd say is a pretty high-flying offense. So I'm just expecting him to have a massive workload. Even, like I said before, the coaching changes raise a little bit of concern, maybe a little bit more risk factor than he had last year, but I think this coaching staff is going to use him the same way as he usually is. He's just too good.
I think Matt Rule is still a good coach, too. We kind of saw when he went to Baylor, and he kind of really turned that program around when they were really at the low of lows, and they were a really good team this past season. So I think he's a good coach, and McCaffrey, kind of like you said, he's in a tier of his own. These other guys that we're going to talk about here later on, each of them, even though they're really talented, really good fantasy options, they each kind of have their own red flag. And with McCaffrey, he was able to be the best fantasy option last year with Kyle Allen at quarterback. I know I just said that, but let's all just kind of really realize that. And Teddy Bridgewater was good with Minnesota forever ago, was good when he was in New York for a little bit. He was good last year with New Orleans. He's a solid league average quarterback. And it's a good offense. and McCaffrey's just going to be a beast this year again, and he should be first overall in every fantasy league. If you have the first overall pick, just take McCaffrey. Don't overthink it.
Yep, couldn't agree more with that. I'm going to jump into my number 2 guy. For me, this is it's kind of a little bit off. It's not even off the board, but I feel like this consensus number 2 is definitely going to go ahead and be Saquon. But I'm going Zeke for my number 2 guy. I think in this offense with Mike McCarthy coming in, I think they're going to give him the ball a lot, and he's going to get a little more reception work this year. I think that was what kind of hurt him last year, and he was really solid last year. I think he finished in the top 24 every single week, but he didn't have that many of those big blow-up weeks. So I think this year you're going to see more of the upside for a guy like Zeke. I think he's a extremely talented running back, and he's one of the better ones in the league, one of the best pure runners in terms of the running back position. But I really see this offense being a top 3-1 in the league, and I think he's going to be a big part of that. I think he's going to have a monster season personally.
Yeah, let me just put him in the spot I have him in. I have him at number 3, so I have one guy above him, but he's still a really good option. The worry, I guess, for him, because I think we're still a couple days out before the opt-out deadline because of the health reasons, because of COVID-19. So Zeke, of course, got COVID-19, I think a couple months ago now. So that is kind of a concern, at least if you're drafting right now, as the time we're recording, that he might opt out. However, kind of sticking with just the football perspective, he is a really good option. One of the best runners in the league. Receiving, he kind of sometimes leaves a little bit left to be desired, but he's not really in that same tier as like a McCaffrey or an Eckler or a Kamara or even a Cook for that matter. Actually, he's kind of in the same range as Cook in terms of receiving, but he's just such a dynamic runner. And as you mentioned, that offense is really good. In my opinion, one of the best in the league. I know Prescott might not be the most popular quarterback, and it's kind of controversial, but I think he's a good option. You got Gallup, you got Cooper, and I think that's really important for a running back because it's easy for these teams that they have one stud running back that they just zone on the running back and they don't even worry about everybody else. But when you have a team with other options, Zeke's going to be able to run. Another kind of concern for him, though, is that offensive line is not as good as it was last year. So that is kind of a red flag, but overall, I have him at number 3 too, so that's a really good option. But he is kind of dropping some rankings, which I find kind of curious.
Yeah,
kind of finding like late in the like 6, 7, 8 range, which I see.
Yeah, I don't get that
kind
at
of
all.
ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's one of the safer early round running backs. So that's kind of just my final point on him. This is a guy I took way too many risks in my own home league last year, which was ridiculous. So I need to kind of scale that back a little bit. And I think Zeke is going to be a good pick there. I think he's one of the safest running backs in this first round range and the first running back on my tier 2 board.
Yeah, for sure. I want to jump into my number 2 guy now, and it is Saquon Barkley. You mentioned it there. He's kind of like the unanimous number 2 pick on most rankings. So I know I'm kind of going traditional here, but he's just a beast. Last year, he did struggle with the injuries a little bit, missed I think 3 games, but he still rushed for over 1,000 yards. He's still caught for more receiving yards than a guy like Zeke Elliott. So when you're in a PPR format, I think he's the clear-cut number 2 guy. At the same time, though, that offense kind of leaves a lot to be desired. You don't exactly know what you're going to get from Daniel Jones this year, even though I personally am a little bit high on him, but he's still entering second year, kind of an unknown. That offensive line, I believe Nate Solder opted out. So I know he kind of had an off year last year, but they're definitely going to miss him on that offensive line. However, they did draft Andrew Thomas, so maybe they improve a little bit. And if Barkley can stay healthy and stay on the field for a full season, he's easily, I think he was the unanimous number 1 guy last year. Injuries kind of impacted him falling down in some rankings, but he's still easily in the top 3. And I think him and Zeke are kind of in a tier of their own. Kind of like we said, McCaffrey was in a tier of his own.
Yeah, that's fair for sure. My tier 2 is a little bit bigger than that, and I'll kind of get to that as we go forward. But Barkley, very close to Zeke. I think that when I statted them out, they were within 3 points of each other. So basically just like a couple receptions here or there is going to get Saquon into that number 2 spot. So having him at 3 is no indictment on him as a player. I am a little bit worried about this offense. With Daniel Jones, his target numbers went down a lot. With Eli, Eli just loves to target Saquon in the running back position in general. But with Daniel Jones being a little more mobile, he's going to take more shots down the field as well because he's a younger quarterback. Some of those dump downs just weren't there for Saquon. And maybe it was part of the reason he had that high ankle sprain as well, so you have to factor that in. But he's a locked and loaded top 5 back for me, and another guy that I think doesn't have very much risk. But he does have a very tough early season schedule, so that's kind of another reason why I have Zeke at 2. because Saquon might be a guy you look to trade for. I know you're going to have to give up a lot no matter what, but maybe you give up top 10 value rather than top 3 value for him, like kind of 5 or 6 weeks into the season, because he has that really, really hard stretch at the beginning of the season. Maybe you're going to be avoiding the Giants offense as a whole. And he's obviously, you're going to put him in the lineup. He's going to do fine, but maybe he won't have some of those blow up games until the second half of the season when you're looking to make that playoff push. This could be a guy that could get you over the edge. You make a blockbuster trade for him kind of into the season instead of drafting him at 2. But 3, I'm definitely taking him there. No debate.
Yeah, and you can also kind of worry about a little bit. You mentioned it there with Daniel Jones's mobility. Is you do kind of worry maybe he steals a touchdown here or there from Saquon in terms of rushing touchdowns. But as I mentioned, though, I mean he's I think almost kind of an underrated receiver. He's not on the level of McCaffrey, but I mentioned it there. He was still almost top 10 in reception yards for a running back, even though he missed a few more games than a lot of the other top guys. But he's a beast. He's one of the best football players in the league, in my opinion, and he's going to be a really good fantasy option too. But how about you jump into your number 4 guy, unless you have any other thoughts on Saquon?
No, yeah, that you kind of touched up nicely and basically everything else I was going to say. So I'll jump into my number 4 guy. It's Alvin Kamara for me. I think he is going to have a very good bounce back season. You know, he just had such struggles in the touchdown department last year. So that's kind of why he finished. I think he finished as the RB9 or 10 or something like that. He's right around like the back end RB1, which is not good for a player that was definitely drafted as a top 3 back in basically every single format. And, you know, I think he's going to have a really nice year. They really don't have that many options to throw the ball to. I know they added Emmanuel Sanders, Jared Cook's there, and obviously Michael Thomas is going to eat up a lot of targets. But Kamara, to me, is the second rating here. I think he's going to get a lot of targets this year. I think he's going to eat in the receiving game. And I think the touchdowns are going to bounce back to a normal amount. Maybe not to his 2018 numbers, but I could see him getting about 10 touchdowns, which is going to be at least 10 on the ground, probably 3 or 4 through the air as well. When he hits those numbers, he's going to be a top 5 back. And this is another guy I think is very safe in the backfield. I think he's a really good player. He's got the pass catching chops to get it done. Maybe not that bruising running back, but he's very savvy with it. He doesn't take a lot of big hits. You know, he's got that kind of shiftiness, and he's a little bit bigger than people give him credit for too as well. He's going to run you over. He can run through. He can run around you. He's a very well-rounded back, and I think another guy that you're going to take is the top 5 back.
Yeah, so this is probably pretty boring for the viewer, but yeah, Alvin Kamara is also my number 4 back. Again, kind of with Zeke, I was kind of surprised because I think because of the off year he had last year, he is kind of down on some other people's lists, kind of in that low, like early 10, 11, 12, kind of that range, which kind of surprised me, honestly. I think he's still easily a top 5 back. You mentioned it there. The touchdowns were hard to come by last year. Only had 6 touchdowns, and it's counting both receiving and rushing. He only had 1 receiving touchdown, which is just really sad. But still, He was 4th in terms of reception yards for running backs, and he missed a couple of games there with an injury. Rushing, he's not going to run for as much as your Zekes or your Dalvin Cooks or even your McCaffreys as well. But he's still going to give you a little bit in that running department. In this instance, this is a full PPR league that we're drafting for. Kamara is a really good option. Easily, I think, a number 5 or number 4 or 5 running back in all fantasy leagues. In terms of overall, not RB4, RB5. But yeah, and you mentioned it there, kind of the concern with Barkley is that he's the only option in that Giants offense. But kind of with Kamara and Zeke, I know maybe you worry about targets, but at the same time, I think it's going to open up a lot of holes for Kamara to run in because he's got a guy like Michael Thomas. They added Emmanuel Sanders. They're a really good offense. But another kind of tidbit I want to add here too is as well as Taysom Hill is a running quarterback, and rumor is he might see a little more playing time, maybe almost split a little time with Drew Brees. And I do kind of worry a little bit if Kamara's his touchdowns don't kind of regress to kind of his at least closer to his 2018 numbers because Taysom Hill might steal some touchdowns here or there. But overall, Kamara is still a really good running back option.
Yeah, I don't think he has the ceiling of those first couple guys, but I think he's going to have a really nice season. I think he's another very safe pick in the first round. Besides the high ankle sprain, kind of very similar to Saquon. You know, he had a little bit of a down year with the high ankle sprain, but was still pretty good and ended the season off on a high note with a 2-touchdown game right at the end of the year. So I think he's going to build on that. I'm going to go ahead and get into my number 5 guy, and this is where things get dicey. And this is a guy that I promise Drew will not have this high. But it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire for me. I'm moving him up to 5, man. I am all in. I think in this offense, having the number 1 running back in the system is it's always been dynamite for Andy Reid. And I think that this is no exception. Clyde Edwards-Helaire They took him in the first round for a reason. They were going to use him regardless of whether or not Damian Williams was in the room. But the fact that he's kind of by himself now is just, it really makes me happy.
Yeah, well, Chris, you shouldn't make promises you can't keep, because guess who I have as my number 5 guy, Mr. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So we're recording this the day after Damian Williams announced that he would be opting out of the season because of health concerns, because of COVID-19. Obviously, we hope he still has a good year. But in terms of fantasy, we're talking about just fantasy. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, this instantly just shoots him up across all boards. I was listening to some fantasy podcast last night, early this morning, after the Damian Williams news kind of broke, and everyone's having Clyde Edwards-Helaire now in this 5, 6, 7 range. You mentioned it there. We've seen it before. This Andy Reid Chiefs offense with guys like Kareem Hunt, who like nobody ever heard of, and then he burst out into the scene. I think was the best fantasy running back, I think 2017, and he was one of the best in 2018 before
one of them.
He got suspended. And we saw it last year. He was kind of more by committee, but I mean, they were still decent options. And now that Clyde Edwards-Helaire, in my opinion, is the clear-cut number 1 guy, at least in the backfield of that offense. I mean, everybody eats Tyreek Hill, doesn't matter. Edwards-Helaire is still going to get a lot of touches, a lot of touchdowns. Obviously, there's a big worry because he is a rookie, and we just don't know. And these other guys are a little bit more proven. But if other people are passing on him, and you have like that 7, 8, 9 overall pick, easily take Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because he could be your RB1, not only your RB1, but could be the number 1 running back in all of fantasy. So definitely, I think he should be shooting up everybody's boards here now that this Damian Williams news has come out. Because we also saw last year, I know I said there's not a big sample size, but he was in a dynamic offense with LSU, and he was still one of the best running backs in the country. Yeah. So easy pick for me, number 5.
Yeah, this was for me as well. This was really easy. And the thing I do like about him is Drew kind of touched up on it. I don't think you're going to have to take him at the 5 spot. And this is kind of why I went from literally hating the 7 spot in the draft to now I love it, because I think I can get him there. And if I can get Clyde Edwards-Helaire at the 7 spot, as well as pairing him with a more safe running back as well in the back or the top of the second, kind of mid-second, I'm going to be super happy with the first part of my draft. I think Helaire, he's a little bit riskier than some of these other early running backs, but I think he's got the upside of I think he could literally be the number 1 running back in the league. I have him set out for over 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns on the ground, as well as over 55 receptions. And if he gets that number, which I think is very achievable in this offense, especially after watching Kareem Hunt do it as a 3rd-round pick or whatever he was, Helaire was a 1st-rounder. People forget about that because, maybe they think they reached at him a little bit, but I think he's one of the most talented backs in this entire draft class, no matter what you think of him. And he's kind of getting those Morris Jones-Drew comparisons a little bit. And if he's that, you remember how good he was in fantasy. MJD was the best fantasy running backs every year he was healthy, at least. He was always a top 5 pick. So if Helaire ends up becoming kind of that MJD type back where he can kind of do it all, very good pass catcher and everything, he's going to be dynamic for fantasy. And even drafting him at 5 would be too low, because he could be the number 1 running back if he's that good.
Yeah, he really could be, and you touched on it all right there. I look at guys like Barkley, like Zeke Elliott a couple of years ago when they were rookies and people were drafting them super high. And I even myself included, I was like, that might not be good. And we saw both of them were dynamic fantasy options in their rookie years. Edwards-Helaire, I think just because the way the league has shifted and people just don't value running backs as much in like the real world NFL, that he that's why he was I think he was the 32nd overall pick. So the last pick of the 1st round. But if this was like 5 years ago, Edwards-Helaire, in my opinion, at least would have been easily a top 5, top 10 overall pick in the actual NFL draft, which I think easily would have made him a lot more of a relevant, I guess, fantasy option for running backs. And you wouldn't maybe feel like you're taking as big of a risk by selecting with your 5th overall pick. But with kind of Edwards-Helaire and Kamara that we just touched on, I think both those guys, because there's always people that take receivers early and something like that. So I think both those guys, you could realistically get a 4th or 5th overall talent in like that 7, 8, 9 range. I do think Kamara and Edwards-Helaire are going to drop a little bit. And maybe not so much Kamara, but Edwards-Helaire in this kind of tier of range guys, I don't really see too many other guys who have the amount of potential to be a number 1 overall option like Edwards-Helaire has.
Yeah, I'm fully buying into the hype that Hilaire's getting, and rightfully so. He's the lead back and the best offense in football. And I mean, he's got Darrell Williams and Darwin Thompson behind him, but those guys aren't talented enough to take that much work away from him. Obviously, they're going to be on the field. They're going to get a few fantasy points. It might be a little bit annoying for you, But at the same time, Edwards-Helaire is going to be there when it counts. And he's a 3-down back. He's got that skill set. He proved it with Joe Burrow when he got a really good amount of reception and also was a beast on the ground in terms of touchdowns. He's a little he's not the fastest back, but he's very quick. He's very elusive, and he's stronger than he looks as well. You know, he's a little bit shorter, but he's a bruiser. Honestly, he doesn't get enough credit for that. People are kind of taking that very lightly for him, but I think he's more of a bowling ball out there, and that's why he's getting the MJD comparisons. That guy just bounces off tackles and is able to catch the ball. Very well-rounded back. I think Helaire. I already want to move him up, man. I am all in on Helaire.
And I honestly, I just want to add one more thing and we jump into our next pick. But I'm looking at these next, I would say 3, even 4 or 5 guys that are on my list. I think realistically in most drafts, they're going to go above Edwards-Helaire. So you might even have the potential to get him early second round. And if you can get like a Michael Thomas or a Devontae Adams wide receiver with your first pick, and then you get Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the second round as your first RB1. I mean, that's a really good team, and that's definitely something that I would look into if you maybe have that 8-9 overall pick in the first round. But I'll jump into my number 6 guy because I think you've led the way for all these other ones. It might be kind of a controversial pick. I know especially for Mr. John, our producer, because he had this guy last year, Mr. Joe Mixon, on his team, and he really struggled the first really half of the season. Was really kind of a bad option overall. A lot of people were labeling him as the biggest bust in all of fantasy football just because he got off to such a slow start. But then he really kind of turned it on down the stretch, was a really good overall running back. And I think this year, this Cincinnati offense, do I think they're going to win a lot of games? Probably not, no. But they're sneaky good. I mean, you got Joe Burrow, number 1 overall pick. We just mentioned Edwards-Helaire, one of the best offenses in the country. Joe Burrow was a big reason why that was one of the best offenses in the country. So you got him at quarterback, which I think is a lot better than the Andy Dalton, Ryan Finley experience of last year. So Mixon already has an upgrade there. And then you got A.J. Green coming back. You got Tyler Boyd, who was a sneaky good receiver last year, in my opinion. You got T. Higgins. Offensive line is still kind of a question mark, but they definitely did improve it at least a little bit. You got Zach Taylor, who's an offensive-minded coach, and I think they're going to be down in a lot of games. And I think Joe Mixon might not be the best receiving back, and I think there is definitely a tier break here after Edwards-Helaire, in my opinion at least. But he's still going to get you some touchdowns in that good offense. And this is something that I really kind of look at when I'm drafting my fantasy teams is I like guys who aren't like the only option in their team, because that kind of concerns me that they're going to get defense are going to zone in on them. They're not going to get as many opportunities. So Joe Mixon, he's in a good offense. A lot of upgrades all around him, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that guy that you took in the late first round, early second round last year, and the guy that kind of showed flashes of it in the second half of last year, rather than that guy that we saw in the first half that was just really bad and an overall fantasy bust. But another guy I think you can get later in the rounds, and if you take a receiver with your first overall pick, a guy you can get in the second round and feel confident, in my opinion, with him being your RB1, because I think he's due for a really good season. And I just like him. I like him more than some other guys who maybe people have over him for sure.
And yeah, you're going to see me put him down a little bit lower on the list. I have him at 10. It's no indictment on Mixon's talent. I think he's a very good running back, and having him at 10 really isn't. I don't think it's an outlandish take personally. I think it's like this range. See, this is kind of where tier 3 starts. The 6 or the 7, at least the 7 through like kind of 10 or 11 guys are all basically within 5 points of each other. And Mixon's no exception to that rule. The things that concern me and why I have a couple other guys ahead of him is just so much turnover with the offense. You know, having a rookie, I think Joe Burrow is going to be very good, and I think he will be better than them, but we don't know for sure. You never know. I mean, sometimes rookies take a while they take at least a year or two to really function in the NFL. So he could be that guy, you know. With their offensive line, it's not that great. It's a very average. I know, you know, they're going to be a little bit better this year, I'm sure, but at the same time, they also have a lot of weapons, so that provides some optimism. I think they're going to spread the ball. It's going to open up some more lanes for Mixon, because he was really the only guy there, and I think that's why he struggled to start. But then they kind of ran into some easier matchups, and he was just able to feast on those. And I don't know if you remember him against the Patriots, but he was just gashing them too. So you watch him even against elite defenses, he can handle it. He's up for the task. I think he's one of the more talented backs in the league. And having him at 10, it's basically just because it's a full PPR. You know, he's not as crazy of a pass catcher as some of these other guys, and that's why I kind of have him a little bit lower on the list here at 10. But if he gets a little more work in the receiving game, which is very possible because I think he has the chops to do it, then he could be a top 5 back. But I think his ceiling is a little bit more limited than some of these other other options ahead of him, which I'll go into my number 6 guy right now. I think this is kind of a chalk pick at number 6. It's Dalvin Cook for me. He's showed up at camp now, so that the fears of him holding out are over. He showed up for the COVID test, so he's in. When he's in, he's going to be a beast this year again, and they're going to give them the ball a lot, I'm sure. I know they were really low in passing volume last year, which might go up a little bit with Justin Jefferson coming in. I know Diggs is gone, but I think they will throw the ball a little bit more. That honestly helps Dalvin Cook, in my opinion. I think he's a great receiving back, one of the better ones in the league in that regard, at least. And I think he's going to be he's going to have a very good season. And this is another guy that's probably going to go ahead of CEH, but I don't really mind that because Cook and him are really close in my rankings. There are only a couple points separate them now in my projections. So taking either one of them at 5 or 6, I know you don't need to take Clyde Edwards-Helaire there, but I would take him there. He's a little bit more of a safe bet, though. So if you're not really in love with the Clyde Edwards-Helaire pick there, take Dalvin Cook instead because they're going to be very close in terms of talent.
So I have Dalvin Cook at number 8. I actually had him a little bit lower because of the threat of him holding out. But as you mentioned there, he did announce that he showed up for the COVID-19 testing, so that he's in, which is good. But you mentioned it right there how Cook is a lot less of a risk than a Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I would completely disagree with you because Cook, yes, he didn't opt out, but I still just don't feel confident in that. And also, he's always an injury concern. I mean, I know last year he was mostly healthy. I think he only missed 2 games last year all season, but he's always just an injury concern for me. And I personally, when I'm taking my RB1 in the first round, I like guys who I feel like are going to be healthy, at least for the most part, and have a little bit of a higher floor than a Dalvin Cook. And I think when he's healthy, and you got to take that chance, but when he's healthy, he's one of the best running backs in the league. And I think he'd easily be, in my opinion, if health wasn't a concern, probably the number 4 guy on my list. I think he would just be outside that Zeke Barkley tier. But injuries are a big concern for me. And that's why I never like to take guys like Dalvin Cook who might get hurt, might opt out. I wasn't in on Le'Veon Bell last year, or even 2 years ago. Zeke, when he was having suspension issues, last year with Melvin Gordon, when he was thought about opting out. I just don't like guys who have a ton of risk in the first round. And that's ultimately why I lower Dalvin Cook a little bit because talent's there, but health is still a big kind of concern. I know he kind of answered some of those questions last year, but still, running backs don't tend to get healthier as they age. They tend to go the other direction. So, but still, Dalvin Cook's a really good running back, has that high ceiling, but health for me lowers him a little bit in my rankings. But still, that's 6 to 14 range, in my opinion, at least for running backs, is kind of interchangeable. And any of those guys could finish as low as 14, or they could finish as high as 6. But that's at least what I think about Dalvin Cook. I know it's kind of controversial, but that's what I think.
Yeah, I just see a little bit more upside from him. That's kind of why I have him separated from everybody else. He's kind of the last guy on my tier 2 list. I think it goes from Zeke to Dalvin Cook, but there really isn't that big of a drop off from tier 2 to tier 3. I agree where I could see any of these guys finishing from anywhere, even from 4 to 14. I could see just being really interchangeable. Cook, I think, has a little more upside than a guy like Mixon just because he gets more of the passing work, especially in a PPR. Maybe in a standard league, I would actually have Mixon ahead of him. He'd probably be up towards the 5 or 6 range for me in a standard just because he's such a beast on the ground. But Cook's going to get that passing work. I think he's going to get a similar amount of touchdowns to a guy like Mixon or Kamara. And I think it's going to be good enough to get him in the top 6, 7-ish. But I could see him finishing up as high as 2 or 3. I mean, he was there last year until he got injured. And, he had a little bit of shoulder problems last year, which held him out of a couple games. But other than that, he did have a pretty healthy season. That's kind of why I have him ranked this high, because he did show that he can stay healthy for a majority of the season. He was kind of a beast in the playoffs, too, so you got to factor that in.
Yeah, and, I mean, I guess I kind of lied earlier because I said Clyde Edwards-Helaire was like the only guy in this kind of tier of guys who has the potential to be like the RB1 overall in all of fantasy. And I guess I kind of lied there because I think Dalvin Cook has that potential.
Yeah.
But again, there's just a lot of question marks there, and that's why I ultimately kind of dropped him a couple spots. But still, I mean, 6 and 8, there's really not a whole lot of difference from there. So I'm still relatively high on his overall talent for sure.
Why don't you get in your number 7 pick for me?
I will. So this guy is a guy who I think he's on the cover of like some fantasy magazines, and he's like, people are high on this guy. He's number 4. I dropped a number 7. It's Derrick Henry. I mean, I know last year he was the overall rushing leader in all of football, and he is a little bit more. He's more of a runner, in my opinion. He's not that great of a pass catching running back. And when you're doing full PPR, I think this 7 range is perfect. I don't think you're going to get him at 7 if you really love Derrick Henry. I think he's going to go most likely top 5, top 6, just because it seems like everybody and their mother is super high on Derrick Henry heading into this year. But if you think about last year, everything went right for him, right? And going into this year, I feel like we're going to see some mega regression. Ryan Tannehill, is he going to be the quarterback we saw, who was like, I think he had the best QBR when he started starting there second half of the season? Is he going to be that guy again, or is he going to be more the guy that he was in Miami, who was injury prone, was good when he was on the field, pretty consistent, but got hurt a lot? And Derrick Henry, before last year, he was like a huge bust for for 5 years. Ever since he started the NFL, he was just a huge bust. Guy you take second or third round and then completely just destroy your team. And now, because he had one really good year, now everyone's like, oh, he's a top 10 guy. So offensive line also lost some guys on the offensive line for Tennessee. Doesn't really give me any confidence in taking Henry with my first overall pick. But like I said, I have him at 7, but I feel like he's probably going to go. He'll probably even go after Kamara. He'll probably be the 4th running back off the board, just judging by a lot of the ratings that I've seen.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this because it's kind of weird because I actually 100% agree with everything you're saying right now, and my rankings aren't even going to reflect that because I have him way lower. I have him down at 13.
Wow.
And like I said, I agree with literally. We're on the same page here. This is basically like we have him at the same spot because we're basically saying the exact same things about the same player. So, Henry, I have him down for over 1,400 yards, but it doesn't matter because he's not a pass catcher whatsoever. And it's absolutely like insane. If he got the pass catching work, he'd be in my top 5 for sure as well. I think he has the ability to do it. He just doesn't. He don't give him the ball at all in the receiving game. And for that reason, even with him having, I think it was 1,450 yards over that, which is very good. It's going to be one of the top marks in the entire league. And well over 10 touchdowns, probably around 13 or 14. He still finished as the RB13 in my rankings. And to me, that's just an indictment on him in PPR. I think people overdraft him in PPR, and they're drafting him. I think his ceiling is at that RB 5-6 range, and maybe even more realistically for me, because I'm a little lower on him, is more at 7 or 8. I really don't think this is a guy that you're drafting with upside from where you're drafting him. I think you're drafting him because he is safe. He's going to have a pretty decent season. I think he's guaranteed to finish inside the top 15. I feel like I'm lower on than the average, well lower than the average consensus, which is definitely true. But I really just don't see the first round love for him. I know he had that really good season, but like you were saying before that, he was a bust every single year for your fantasy.
Yeah.
You're drafting the second round and the first round. And last year he was like a 5th round pick. So, and he ended up finishing inside the top 10, which is impressive. And it was a very good pick for your team. You probably won at least got to the playoffs because he was so dominant in the second half. But that's really the only stretch of his career where he's been really fantasy relevant. Other than that, he has those boom weeks. He has those weeks where he has those weeks where he has like 70 yards and no touchdowns, and then you're really annoyed in a PPR league at least. In the standard league, he'd probably be in my top 6, but PPR, I'm out. I'm not taking him this year.
Yeah, I didn't want to get roasted in the comment section because I thought about like just completely just putting Derrick Henry like in that 13 to 15 range, but I still think that he is still a really good runner. And even though we're doing this for a full PPR and he doesn't really offer a lot in the pass, he doesn't really offer anything. Let's be honest, in the passing game. Like you mentioned there, Joe Mixon isn't the best pass catcher. Derrick Henry is like way worse than even him. So I still think, though, he's going to run a lot. He's going to get you a lot of touchdowns, even if they are on the ground. And I think ultimately, when I kind of see the other guys in this range, I feel like Derrick Henry, like you mentioned there, he's a little bit of a safer pick. But like I like the seventh is that's his ceiling in my opinion. So he doesn't have as much upside as some of these other guys that are around him and a little bit lower than him. That, as I'll mention here, we keep going through the rankings. But like you're not going to get him at the 7th spot, even if you are in a full PPR league. He's going top 4 because that's just every mock I've done. He's going super high, and I have not taken him in any league because I'm avoiding him. He's one of my top avoid guys because I think like you mentioned it there, he's getting way overdrafted in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think I believe he was one of your don't drafts in our one of our previous videos, and I was also going to put him on there as well. And then I statted him out, and look where he finished, 13. I mean, you're not going to be happy with that if you take him anywhere in the first round. If he was a second round pick, I'd be more interested in him. But I'm really just out on him in the first round. I think he's not risky, but I think he could still be a bust in fantasy, even while not being risky, I guess, because he has that safe workload. But if if he gets 10 touchdowns this year, he's a bust. He's not going to be good because 10 touchdowns, that means there's at least 6 weeks where he doesn't have a touchdown. If he doesn't have one, he's going to score, 8 points for you? Wow, that's nothing in PPR. If you're getting 8 points from your RB1, you're not winning. You're not making the playoffs. And I think whoever takes him in the first round is a non-playoff team unless you're drafting really well after that. I think you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball and you're really capping your upside. And any of these running backs in this range above him, I would absolutely take. And there's even a couple guys below him with their price included. I'm taking him over Le'Veon Bell. I mean, that's a spoiler alert. He's behind him, but that's a guy you can take him in the 3rd round. I'd much rather have him than Derrick Henry in the 1st round, if that makes sense to you. So draft included, there's guys even as low as 17, 18. I'd probably rather have than him. So this is out on.
I 100% agree with everything you just said because I think talent-wise, he's the number 7 guy. But even if you take, so you say you take him 4th overall and he's the 7th best running back I have in my rankings, you're going to be disappointed because you passed on a guy like Alvin Kamara, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, even, in my opinion, Joe Mixon, even Dalvin Cook, if he stays healthy. And you're going to be disappointed if you take him with the 4th overall pick. So even though I think talent-wise, 7th best guy, I personally would wait and be much happier with a guy like in that 17-18 range, at least just based off of my rankings for sure. He's going to be a bust, I think, regardless, just based on where he's being taken. Yeah. However, you can probably consistently count on him for like 10 to 12
RB2 production,
RB2, high, like low end RB1. I'd say mid-tier RB1 production, but that's not nowhere near the level that a guy like Saquon and Zeke are getting, and that's kind of where he's being drafted right now because he had such a great season last year. And like I mentioned before, Tennessee lost a piece on the offensive line. He's a running back. Like he doesn't really offer a lot in the pass catching department, so that's going to hurt his numbers a little bit. And as with any running back, has a monster season like he did last year, like we saw with DeMarco Murray, remember, a couple of years ago. Yeah. They always regress, it seems like. And as you said, last year was kind of an aberration a little bit. He was always just a consistent fantasy football bust. It seemed like year after year after year. Last year had a really good season, but he definitely does not have as much potential as these other guys. And I would be much happier taking pretty much anybody else like around him and even below him, just because based on where he's going right now in drafts.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my number 7 guy. And honestly, this isn't a super different player in terms of what he actually brings to the table. Well, maybe not what he brings to the table, but what he did last year. It's Josh Jacobs for me. And I'm a little bit higher on him than consensus, but I really see a pass catching increase for Jacobs this year. You know, he isn't going to be one of those elite fantasy options in terms of pass catching, but I think he's a very good pass catcher. Like he was awesome at Bama. They just didn't give him the ball in that regard. And I know they added Lynn Bowden, and they kept Jalen Richard around, which are both pretty good pass-catching backs. But I think Jacobs is going to see a slight increase. And even if he can get to that 35 to 40 reception mark, with the ability of him just being an awesome running back on the ground. Last year, I think he was on pace for 1,500 yards, and I have him projected around there with at least 12 touchdowns as well. I think he's going to be a monster this year. And I think he has the upside for more as well. This is another guy. I don't think you have to draft him at this spot, but I think you can take him basically right in that early 2nd round, maybe as your 2nd running back. But he could be easily a top 5 back. I am very high on Josh Jacobs this year. I think this is not a very good offense, but I think they're going to be better this year. They added some speed on the outside. Henry Ruggs is obviously a beast. They also still have Tyrell Williams, Darren Waller. So they got some weapons on the outside that'll maybe open it up a little bit more. But Jacobs was so efficient on the ground last year too. He averaged almost 5 a pop with well over 200 carries, and even dealing with a shoulder injury as well and playing through it for most of the season. He missed a couple games, unfortunately, at the end of the year. But besides that, man, he was a beast, and that was without any PPR ability. And he has the ability to catch passes. He's a very good pass catcher. So I got him up at 7.
Yeah, so I thought I was high on him, and I have him at number 12. So I didn't realize that you were super high on him. I knew you were Jacobs. I didn't know you were that big of a Jacobs fan, because you kind of mentioned it there. A lot of people are drafting him kind of in that teen, like 16, 17 kind of range, at least based on the rankings and the drafts that I've seen and done. So number 12, I think, is still kind of a little bit high compared to other people. And the big reason why he dropped for me was because of, you kind of mentioned it there, was the pass catching. I mean, he's a really good runner. He missed 3 games last year, still rushed for 1,150 yards, which is really good. I think he had 7 touchdowns as well. So those are good numbers on the run, especially if you're banking on him staying healthier this year. But in terms of pass catching, he was worse than Derrick Henry. And I understand what you were kind of saying, that he has the ability to, he's just not getting the options. And I'm still just kind of concerned that maybe he won't get the options because it wasn't like the Raiders lost receivers; they added receivers. They got Henry Ruggs, and Derek Carr. Still, I mean, I guess maybe he'll check down a little bit more and throw it off to Jacobs because I think he is.
That's kind of what I said.
Yeah, I think he is the most talented, in my opinion, talented offensive player they have currently. And I think the Raiders' offense is going to be good. I have them. I know we're not talking about real life NFL right now, but I have them kind of competing for that that wild card spot for sure. Maybe not getting it, but competing. I think they're a reasonably good offense. But I just think if you're taking him, you have him right now as your 7 overall guy. If you're taking him in the first round, you think he's like a first round level talent in terms of running back, I would just be a little bit worried. I guess kind of because of the injuries, but I think he's going to be durable enough. I just concerned that he might not just get the opportunities in the passing game to make him a viable PPR option. But if you're taking him in a standard league, I think easily he's a top 10 guy. And as I kind of mentioned before, this, in my opinion, the 6 to like 14 guys are all pretty interchangeable. So Josh Jacobs is still a really good option there.
Yeah, and even on my projections, I only have him down for 36 receptions, which isn't even that outlandish of a stat boost. But I have him over 1,400 yards and 10 rushing touchdowns, which I really don't think these stats are unachievable for him. That's why I have him at the 7th spot. I think he can do even more than that. And you have to even factor in 7 rushing touchdowns last year. That's not a crazy number either. I think he's due for a little bit of positive regression in that regard as well for how many attempts he has. As long as he can stay healthy, I think he's going to be upwards of 10 touchdowns on the ground. And maybe add a couple through the air as well. But I think he will catch a few more passes. I think Derek Carr, he loves to check it down in general. I think DeAndre Washington gone opens up a little bit of a lane for him. I know, like I said, Lynn Bowden, Jalen Richard, I will have them both projected for over 40 receptions. So it's not like they're going away. But I think Jacobs is going to be around that 40-ish target mark, and he's going to catch around 35 passes. And if he does that, I think he's a top 10 running back. And like I said, there's people that see the risk. That's why he's kind of more in where Drew, maybe even a little bit lower than that. People have him down there, but I see the upside for him, and I really want to draft him this year. I hope I can get him as my RB2. If I compare him with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, oof, man, I think could be a dynamic duo. You could get Helaire in the back of the first, you take Jacobs in the early part of the second. I think you're in for a very good season.
Yeah, I would just. If you get him as your RB2, I mean, he's probably one of the best RB2 options in my opinion, just because of that upside. But because of the injuries, because of whether he'll get enough touches, honestly, that's why I would feel uncomfortable taking him as an RB1, kind of like you have him. But I think his upside is obviously high-end RB1. But in my opinion, just based on what I've seen, I think he's going to be more in that low-end RB1, high-end RB2, and kind of like where I am right now. Yeah, but I already talked about my number 8 guy in Dalvin Cook. So how about you jump into your number 8 guy?
At number 8, I got Aaron Jones. Green Bay Packers running back. He was so awesome last season, and he's obviously due for a little bit of negative regression. He's not scoring 16 rushing touchdowns again. And I'm not projecting him to do that. I think I have him down for 9 or 10 on the season. But I still think he's a very good option at the running back position. He's not really being drafted like he was the number 2 running back last year in full PPR, which he was. He was awesome last year. There's no denying that he was incredible. But he was a little bit streaky, so you have to factor that in. He had some games where he disappeared from the game script, and that's just Matt LaFleur not using. I don't think he's a very good coach personally. I think he's overrated, and I think he doesn't use Aaron Jones properly. I think Aaron Jones is a 3-down workhorse back. I think he's one of the more talented backs in the league as well. And if they saw that in him, I think he could be a top 5 running back yet again. But having him down at number 8, it's no problem it's nothing to do with him. It's all about just the stubbornness of Matt LaFleur not to give him the full workload every single week, because he has those weeks where he just absolutely dominates. He had so many week winning weeks, and if you can get him as your RB2, this is another guy I like right after Jacobs and kind of the next couple guys on the list I also like as my RB2. But after pairing him with a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Dalvin Cook, ooh, man, that's a dynamic duo, because you got Dalvin or you got Helaire with the safe RB1 option for me, and then Aaron Jones is your RB2. I think he's also an RB1. So like if you get both of them, man, I think you're golden for this year. And I think it's all about that running back room early on in the draft. I think you got to draft these guys early, man. I think you can't pass up on talent like this. Whether like Aaron Jones this year, maybe you're a little bit lower on him. I think you got to take him. He's just too talented, and I think he has the upside to be really good.
Yeah, so I'm lower on him. I have him at number 11. And you kind of mentioned it there. It's not because of his talent. I had Aaron Jones last year. I think he's a really talented running back. But I think there's going to be some regression. He had 16 rushing touchdowns last year, which is just insane. He is he was top 10 in rushing yard or receiving yards for running backs last year. I don't think he gets enough credit, in my opinion, for how, I guess he's not on that same level as guys like McCaffrey or Eckler, but he's in that kind of like Dalvin Cook, Miles Sanders kind of range, in my opinion, at least. So he's an option in the receiving game. However, I just don't like the Green Bay offense. If your name's not Davante Adams, I'm probably going to avoid you this year just because I don't really trust Matt LaFleur. And they drafted a running back in the second round. I think it was second or third round. Yeah. And I think he's going to take some touches away from Jones. Probably going to take some goal line opportunities because he's a big back. So he's probably going to be there on like 3rd and 4 from the 4-yard line or something like that. Probably take some touchdowns. Probably going to be kind of a vulture in that regard. And that's why with Jones, I'm just kind of lower on him. I'm also lower on him because he is going a little bit higher. I know you mentioned, Chris, that you hope that he kind of drops for your RB2 range. In most of the drafts that I've done in the rankings I've seen, he'd be like maybe the first RB2 taken. Most times he's kind of taken at 8, 9, 10 range. So you probably have to take him as your RB1, unless you decide to go running back heavy, like with your first 2 picks, and Aaron Jones will probably still be there for your 2nd round pick. But the Green Bay offense, it's nothing to do with Jones. The Green Bay offense just doesn't evoke any confidence in me. And I'm worried that he's gonna not have as many opportunities as he did last year. I mean, he would regress anyway under normal circumstances. And now that it seems like Green Bay is like kind of set him up to regress on their own, it's not going to be good for Jones. And I think if you take him as your clear-cut RB1, like a lot of people are doing, I think you're going to be disappointed because I don't think he's going to have as good of a season as he did last year.
Yeah, and I definitely don't think he's going to have as good of a year last year as well. We're not really that far apart in our rankings, so I'm not really disagreeing with anything you're saying. I think A.J. Dillon's trash, personally. I don't think he's a good running back at all. I think they've reached on him big time. I even said it in our breakdown. That's why I give him an F in the offseason, because they've made draft picks like this. I think A.J. Dillon, while he will vulture a few touchdowns away, I think he was bound to do that or whatever running backs there is bound to do that anyway. Jamal Williams, I think it cuts more into his role.
Yeah.
As well. Williams is going to be very relevant this year, but I really don't think Dillon, besides having maybe a few decent runs, a few touchdowns here and there, I don't think he's going to be that relevant in terms of fantasy at all. He will be a little bit of a vulture and might be frustrating. But with Aaron Jones, if you can get him in the 2nd round, I don't really mind where you take him if you're getting him in the first couple picks. I think people are kind of sleeping on him a little bit, though. I think he still has the upside to be very good, and it's another running back that I could see finishing within the top 5. I mean, he did it last year, obviously on the back of a ton of touchdowns. But I can see a little bit of a receiving upgrade for him. No Devin Funchess now. Jimmy Graham's gone. It's a lot of meaningless targets that are gone. Those players are pretty trash as well. But I can see Aaron Jones getting a little bit more like a receiving uptick, as well as, Davante Adams is obviously going to get the bulk of the receiving work and a lot of touchdowns through the air. But I think Aaron Jones has got a little bit of upside in the receiving game as well.
Yeah, and we've seen in the past, too, Aaron Rodgers likes to throw to guys that he trusts. And I think currently in that offense, I think Davante Adams and Aaron Jones are probably the 2 guys you trust the most. Maybe you can throw Jamal Williams in there as well. But like I said, with Aaron Jones, I think his range of outcomes, he could be a top 5 running back, or he could be outside the top 20, because we just never know with that Green Bay offense, in my opinion. And I think even though A.J. Dillon and I agree with you, I don't think he's the most talented guy, and I don't think they should have taken him in the 2nd round. I think they should have taken a receiver. That does not mean, even though he's not talented, that doesn't mean that he's not going to play, because I feel like Green Bay is going to want to prove to people, hey, you were making fun of us, because everyone's been making fun of them for their draft since it happened in April, that, hey, you made fun of us, so we're going to give this guy a ton of touches, taken away from Aaron Jones, and it might not end well for Aaron Jones if you take him in that high RB or low RB1, even high-end RB2 range. But he definitely has the potential to be really good, but he also has the potential to be really bad. Because even last year, when he had a really good season, he did kind of have that potential to be kind of a little bit boom or bust. Like if he got some touchdowns, he was amazing. If he didn't get any touchdowns, he kind of ruined your week a little bit. And I know because I had him last year.
Yeah, he can be a little bit of a boomer bust guy, but I'm kind of done. I'm kind of done like addressing everything with him. So why don't you get into your number 9 guy for us, Drew?
Yeah. So my number 9 guy is a guy who kind of mentioned with Derrick Henry. This is a guy that let a lot of people down, it felt like, for like 5 years straight. But it's Kenyon Drake. I think a big reason why he wasn't successful in Miami was because they just didn't give him enough opportunities. And I think he's going to get opportunities in Arizona. They got a sneaky good offense. I'm definitely worried without like the weird offseason, weird training camp, all that Drake and the entire Arizona offense, adding Hopkins, Cliff Kingsbury is only in the second year. I do worry that it might take a little time for him to adjust. But I think by the end of the year, I think Kenyon Drake will be a sneaky top 10 running back in most leagues. And I think he's definitely a guy who, if he maybe somebody reaches on him in your draft and is really frustrated because Drake's still kind of getting the whole Arizona offense still getting kind of accustomed to each other the first couple weeks, he's a guy I would look to trade and maybe buy low on. Or if you are drafting, he drops a little bit lower in some of your rounds. I've seen some drafts where he does drop a little bit. Definitely take him because I think he's a definitely high-end RB2. And I think he has the potential to be a top 10 back, as you can see by my rankings, because I think I'm not as high on Kyler Murray as I know you are, Chris, and a lot of other people who think he might win the MVP like Lamar Jackson did last year. But I still think Kyler Murray is going to take a big step forward, and I think Drake's going to reap the benefits of that because he is a really good option in the receiving game. We're talking about full PPR, and he's also a decent runner. And we saw that last year when Arizona finally gave him some more opportunities that Miami didn't. I'm high on Drake, and I think he's going to be a top 10 back.
Yeah, I have Drake at 11, so I'm not really definitely not disagreeing with anything you're saying here. I really like Drake this season. This is a guy that I do not mind taking at the back half of the first or back end of the first round, early part of the second round, because I think he has a lot of upside. He proved that he has those blow up games right at the end of the year. He had that 4 touchdown game based on the playoff matchup you were in if you had him. So Drake in this offense proved he can be really well. And while there is a little bit of risk, it was a small sample size. We've seen him in the past get drafted kind of in the second, third round and really let fantasy owners down.
Yeah.
He's basically done that. But that was more of an Adam Gase problem than him. One of the worst coach in the NFL, doesn't know how to use a player right. I mean, big shocker there. Makes a lot of sense. But Cliff Kingsbury is going to use Drake, and he fits the system really well. And if Kyler takes that step forward that I'm projecting a lot of other people are, I think Drake also will. And I think he's going to get a little more receiving work. I think he's got a good chance at some goal line touches, goal line touchdowns, because I think this offense has a lot of room to improve inside the red zone. They were one of the worst teams in terms of red zone touchdown percentage last year. But I think that changes this year. I think this offense is going to be high flying. I think Drake's going to be a big part of that. He's going to have a big workload. It's all about whether or not he can handle it, and I think he can. So I'm all in on Drake. He was almost a guy that I wanted on my draft list, kind of a guy I considered for that. So I'm in on him too. I agree with everything you said.
Yeah, definitely some risks there, as you mentioned, and as I mentioned as well. He has let a lot of fantasy owners down in past years, but I like the flashes we saw last year. And I think the reason that he was letting people down was more so because of Adam Gase and the situation he was in Miami. And I think now that he's in Arizona, offensive-minded head coach and Cliff Kingsbury, I think he's going to get a lot of options, and I think he's going to succeed. I think he's going to be a really good running back. And like I said, he's a guy that I would look at possibly buying low on early in the year if somebody kind of gets frustrated with him because it takes him a little while to get accustomed to that Arizona offense. Because I do envision them maybe taking a couple weeks to get used to each other. So adding DeAndre Hopkins is a really good receiver. But how about you jump into your number 9 guy?
All right, so my number 9 guy, it's a guy that I had on my do not draft list, but it's a guy that I still like a decent amount. It's Nick Chubb for me. I definitely like him more than Derrick Henry. He's a very similar back to Henry, but he's a much better pass catcher. I know he's not going to catch an insane amount of passes, but I think he'll still catch enough to have a decent fantasy season. I have him. Let's look at my projections here. I'll pull them up while I'm talking. He had a good first half of the season last year. This is a guy that would have been a top 5 back. I have him projected for over 1,400 yards, 11 touchdowns, as well as about 35% receptions. Very similar numbers to Josh Jacobs, and I think that's kind of he's a safe running back, but I don't know. I don't really like the upside with him as well. I know I said he's on my do not draft list. I've kind of changed I improved his projection down to like 12, 13 for me, right around Derrick Henry's spot, but I did improve my projection a little bit just because he's a talented back, and I think his offense does take a step forward this year. And they did add a lot to their offensive line. So, I moved him up a little bit because of that.
Yeah, so I kind of went the opposite way. I think when we first started doing fantasy things, I was like kind of high on Chubb. I think I had him like top 5, top 6. Now he actually slots in my number 13 spot.
Oh
So
wow.
I'm lower on Nick Chubb for pretty much all the reasons you said. I don't really disagree with anything you said. He is a good runner, good running back, and I think it kind of shows what I mean because you and I both put Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb in the same spot because they're very similar players. Don't offer a ton in the passing game, very similar numbers in that regard. And Chubb, I really worry with Kareem Hunt, and not kind of spoiler alert here, I do have Kareem Hunt a little bit lower on my list, but I think he's going to seriously take some touches away from Chubb that he got last year. I still think he's going to be a really good running option, and that's why I have him higher than Hunt on my list. But the touches concern me. The fact that he really didn't even offer that much in the passing game last year when Kareem Hunt wasn't there for the whole season. Now that Hunt is there, I don't think it doesn't look well for Chubb. And I think in terms of the ceiling on some of the other guys, he has a lot lower ceiling. I think he has a much lower floor. I think kind of like I said with Aaron Jones, I could easily envision Nick Chubb falling out of the top 20 here.
Oh wow! Because, see, I'm not gonna go that far, but I do think that his ceiling is very limited. I think I have him statted for about his ceiling, maybe a 1 spot or 2 spots higher. I think the highest I could see him finishing is the RB7. But without Kareem Hunt, if he goes down with an injury or something, Chubb is a locked and loaded top 5 back for me, and I would draft him inside the top 5. But you can't project injuries, so Kareem Hunt's going to be there, and you'll see. I also have him within my inside 5, so you'll see. I would rather draft Kareem Hunt where he's going than where Nick Chubb's going, because I think people are reaching on Chubb a little bit. I do have him at 9, but I would take Mixon, Drake, and my number 12 guy all over him because of the upside.
Yeah, with Nick Chubb, you said it right there. If Hunt goes down with an injury, Chubbs is going to be probably a 6-7 overall running back in all fantasy leagues, regardless of the format. But you're really banking on a lot there if you take him because he's going like in that 6-7 overall running back range right now. And I don't feel confident in that. I would much rather, like you said, wait for a Kareem Hunt or some of these other guys that we're going to mention. But
yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump into my number 10 guy. And I have a feeling, just because I know how much you love this guy, that our number 10 and number 12 guys are the same guy. So forgive me if I'm wrong, but it's going to be Miles Sanders. Kind of the opposite of Nick Chubb, for me at least, is when the fantasy season kind of started. We started doing rankings. I started kind of preparing for the fantasy season. I was much lower on Miles Sanders than you and a lot of other people. But when I started doing some research, I'm really starting to kind of buy all the hype a little bit. I think he's going to be a really good passing option, especially in PPR leagues. Carson Wentz kind of concerns me because he needs to stay healthy you need someone to throw him the ball. But we also got the news that Marquise Goodwin's opting out of the season, so that gives just even more touches available for Miles Sanders. It seems inevitable that a Philadelphia receiver is going to go down with an injury, which will give even more touches to Miles Sanders. He's a decent runner, I think, but I definitely think he's more of an option in the passing game. He's going a little bit lower in drafts. You can probably get him in that mid to late second round, and I think he has the potential to be a top 7, 6, maybe even top 5 running back overall for your league. So if you can get him as your RB2, and maybe take a chance on him with your RB1 if you go receiver heavy early in your fantasy draft. I think he's a really good option there.
And I actually do not have him at number 12. Wow. I have him at number 14, which is a little surprising to me myself. I basically did my ranking straight off of my projections from this season. I have him down for over 1,000 yards, 6 rushing touchdowns, which might be a little bit low, and then 52 receptions as well, which are good numbers. And I think he has the upside. That's why I still like him. I know my ranking's a little bit lower on him for a guy that I said I was like basically all in on this year, and I still am. I'm not saying I'm not, but I like his draft price in the second round. I think he has the upside to finish as literally another top 5 running back. I think he could be in that range. He's a very talented player. I'm just scared that they're not going to give him that full workload no matter who's there. So I have him. I think the more realistic number is around that 12 to 15 range in terms of running backs. But I think he has the upside, more upside than basically I think Mixon, Henry, Chubb, basically all those. Even Jacobs, I could see him having a little bit more upside than him as well. So I think that's why I'm still all in on Sanders. I know his projections don't showcase that, but I could see him finishing with 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns, and then 70 receptions, being more of like the Christian McCaffrey type of running back. Not saying he is McCaffrey, but I could see him having that similar stat line as McCaffrey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with Sanders, Sanders and Drake. Ultimately, I put them over like Jones, Jacobs, and Chubb because I just like their upside, and I feel like they have far more upside than those three guys, in my opinion, at least. And Sanders falls in that category. I'm really surprised that you have him a little bit lower than I do because I honestly, when we were started this episode, I thought he was going to be like number 8. Like I kept waiting as you kept listing guys. I kept waiting for you to say Miles Sanders. So I'm surprised that you had him in 14, but that's still pretty good range. And I think you can take him as your RB, like low end RB1, or you can probably take him as your RB2 in most drafts. And I think very few guys in that range have the potential to be an RB1 like Miles Sanders. So I'm kind of buying in. I'm buying into the hype a little bit. But how about you tell us who your 12 guy is, since it's not Miles Sanders?
Yeah, my number 12 guy. I mean, this is fully the PPR bump that you're getting from this guy. It's Austin Ekeler for me. I went in not thinking I was going to like Ekeler, but I'm going to go over his stats for you for a second. I have him down for over 700 yards, 4 touchdowns, and then 73 receptions for 600 yards and 4 touchdowns. So, like, I don't think those are that insanely, like, crazy of stats. I don't think I have him projected for anything outrageous, but that's what I'm talking about when you get the PPR bump. You know, he's got over 20 more receptions than a guy like Miles Sanders. I think that's kind of what gave him the jump there. Obviously, he's not the same running backs as any of these other guys in the top 10, but I think he's a safe RB2. And this is a guy I'd definitely be willing to take in the second round. I would take Sanders over him, I think, just because of the upside. I don't think Ekeler has the upside of being anywhere like in the top 3, but he did prove that he can be a top 10 running back last season. He finished as the RB6 or something like that. I know that was with Phillip Rivers. There's a lot of turnover, but no Melvin Gordon means that he could have a workload, and he could get. I don't know if you saw. He posted a picture and he looked like an absolute superhero on that picture, man. Maybe he's ready for a bigger workload. I know you shouldn't fall into those hype videos, but that was one. I saw the picture and I was like, man, this guy looks like a monster. He looks like he's ready for a big season. So I am quickly becoming all in on Ekeler. I definitely bumped his projections up a decent amount from where I had him before. I think I had him down in the RB 16, 17 range, but now he's got that bump to number 12. And I think he can do better than that. I really do. I think he can be really solid. And like I said, you don't have to pay up for him. Like him and Sanders are in a similar tier to me in terms of where I draft them. I'd be willing to take them kind of in that early second round. And if I can land either one of them as my RB2 after getting any of those top 7 running backs, I'm going to be extremely happy.
Yeah, so Austin Ekeler, to kind of finish this puzzle piece right here, Austin Ekeler is my number 14 guy. For much of the reason you said, I think this is a guy who it'll pay for you to like do some research and do some homework and know what league you're drafting in. Because if this wasn't a PPR league, I think Ekeler would drop a little bit on my rankings.
Might not even be my top 20.
Yeah, he doesn't offer that much in the running game, and I think as a result, if you have some people in your draft who are like, oh, this is just gonna be a standard league. Austin Ekeler doesn't give me any rushing yards. Who cares? He might drop a little bit, and I think you could get him like after some of these guys that are lower in my rankings, and you could get like a RB1 potential in PPR because he was like I mentioned earlier when we were talking about McCaffrey, he was not far. He had 993 reception yards last year, which was 12 less than Christian McCaffrey, and he had 8 receiving touchdowns, which is 4 more than McCaffrey. So he's arguably the best receiving back in the game, and that was with Melvin Gordon. So I think he's a really good option for PPR. Of course, if this was a standard lead, I'd have a different opinion on him. But I think you have the potential to get him later in your drafts. If like I've mentioned for a lot of these guys, if you go receiver heavy early, or if you take like McCaffrey with your first overall pick, take a couple of receivers, and then get an Austin Ekeler a little bit later in the rounds, I think that could really pay off, and that'd be a really good team. Because like I said, McCaffrey's the best receiving back. Eckler's not far behind. So in full PPR, Ekeler is a top tier, potential, maybe even RB1 option. The only concern for Ekeler is who's going to be the quarterback. I think Chargers coach Anthony Lynn said that it's going to be I think Tyrod Taylor. I think I saw a couple days ago. I guess Tyrod Taylor's okay. Justin Herbert is a completely unknown. We don't know what we're going to see from him. It seems like people are either super high or super low on him. So that's a kind of a concern for me. But if he drops a little bit and you can get him in that RB2 spot, I mean, in a full PPR, Austin Ekeler is a really good option. And they do have some good receivers there, but I think Austin Ekeler is going to be maybe the best guy there, as we saw last year. And then Melvin Gordon's gone. He's going to be the clear-cut RB1 there. And I think he's due for a big season. As you said, he's looking jacked right now. So Austin Ekeler was a guy I was a little bit lower on, and he's definitely jumped up the charts, kind of like Miles Sanders has in my rankings.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with basically everything you said there. On kind of the quarterback controversy, whoever plays quarterback, I don't think it's going to really matter. I think he's still going to get a lot of work because their offensive line stinks. So they're going to Sure, I know Tyrod Taylor runs the ball a lot, so it's
Yeah.
gonna. I have him for a receiving dip, and I have him for like 30 less receptions than he had last season. And I actually do think he's the best pass catching running back in the entire league. I believe it for sure. I think he's more efficient than McCaffrey in terms of the receiving game, and he's a more well rounded receiver rather than McCaffrey is just really good at the dump off play. Personally, I mean he can do other stuff. Obviously, I'm not saying he can't, but I think Eckler is the best pass catching back in the league, and I think it will prove it this year. I really like him as a player, man. I don't know. I have a soft spot for him. I think he's underrated every year. I do also really like Melvin Gordon, so I just basically like that whole backfield. Basically, whoever got the ball, I was really happy with because I think both of them are very talented players. But why don't you go into your number 15 guy?
Yeah, so this is a guy that was in our do draft episode that we did a couple weeks ago, and that's Le'Veon Bell. I think you mentioned him briefly when we were talking about a couple other people. I think we were talking about when you should just wait on Derrick Henry because you get a guy like Lev Bell late in the rounds. I think people are going the exact opposite direction with him because last year, like I kind of said earlier, as people were drafting him super high, and I was kind of like, why are people taking him so high? But now it seems like people are going the opposite way, and everyone's like passing on Le'Veon Bell. Oh, he's done. He sucks. Whatever. Everything that possibly could have went wrong for Lev Bell last year went wrong. Right? Sam Darnold got mono. The offensive line was just absolutely tarnished. It was a mess. And Adam Gase, it seems like he doesn't really get along with Adam Gase still. But I like Sam Darnold for a good year, a bounce back year, because I think he is very talented. The offensive line still is not great, but they added Mekhi Becton. They added some pieces. It's not as bad as it was last year. And I think Lev Bell, he's a good receiving back too. So if you're doing a PPR, I don't think he's quite on that level of like an Austin Eckler or a Christian McCaffrey, obviously, but he's still a really good receiving option out of the backfield. He's going to be a big part of that offense. He's going to get the touches, going to get the touchdowns. And people are going the complete opposite way. And I think if you're smart and you take advantage of that, you could get a possible RB1 very late, like maybe even like third or fourth round, because that's even fifth round. That's kind of where he's going right now.
Yeah, people are really just bouncing back from. He was in the first round last year, and I unfortunately came in the first round. But he still finished as the RB17 with basically everything that happened wrong, and he missed a game too. So like in terms of, I was annoyed having him as my RB1 just because he didn't offer me that any week. It was always RB2 numbers every single week when I needed him to have those big blow up games that he just didn't get, and he probably won't get again this year. But Bell in a full PPR, man, I think this is one of the best picks you can make in the draft. This is why I love going RB heavy. I just can't pass up him in the third round. I will be taking him in the third round this year, basically no matter where I have it in the third round, because I think he's that talented. I think he could easily finish inside the top 10, and I hate where I have him ranked, but I just can't move him up. I think there's a very clear tier break, but then everybody behind him is also in a tier of their own, I guess. So he's basically by himself in maybe that fourth, fifth tier, just by himself all alone. I could see him finishing ahead of all. You can make a case for him finishing ahead of guys even like Aaron Jones up there. I think he could finish as the RB8, but I really don't see him being any lower than 15. I think we're all drafting him at his floor, and while he could still have a very good bounce back season, I think he's going to have a workload. He's very safe. If you're going wide receiver heavy and you have him as your RB1, that's not a terrible strategy as well. But I'm going to be going wide receiver or running back heavy very early, so I would be willing to have him as my third running back and just load up. And we play in a double flex league as well, so you can load up on running backs. You really can, and that's going to be my plan. And this is key reason why, because I am in love with Le'Veon Bell this year.
Yeah, I love him here where he's being taken right now. I've taken him in several leagues. I think, as I mentioned before, I know people are banking on that everything that went wrong last year is going to go wrong again this year because it's the Jets. But Sam Darnold's not going to get mono again, hopefully, and the offensive line's improved, even if it's still kind of a question mark. And I think Lev Bell, you kind of mentioned it there kind of when you were talking there, where if you're expecting RB1 numbers from him, you're probably going to be disappointed. But if you just want quality, steady, solid RB2, high-end RB2 numbers, you're going to be very satisfied with taking Lev Bell there in the third or fourth round. So, but if we don't have anything else to add about Le'Veon Bell, I'll jump into my number 16 guy who we mentioned earlier when we were talking about Austin Eckler. It's his former teammate, Melvin Gordon. This Broncos offense, I am slowly becoming in love with it. I'm not even though he does have my name, I'm not a huge Drew Lock fan. It's not that I don't like him. It's just I don't know what – he's still kind of a question mark because I know he had a decent 5-game stretch last year. But it's still kind of like what's that sample size, right? Jimmy Garoppolo was on fire that 5 games, and then now he's like the butt of every San Francisco 49er choking in the Super Bowl again joke. So we don't really know what we have with Drew Lock, but you look at the other guys on this offense, you got Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton. I mean, this is a really good offense. They added some pieces on the offensive line. I think the Broncos are going to be not as good as the Chiefs, obviously, but they're going to kind of make the Chiefs sweat a little bit. I think they're going to be a good team. And I think a big part of that is going to be Melvin Gordon. He's a good receiving running back. He's going to get some touchdowns. I know people are worried about Phillip Lindsay, and I think he's definitely going to take some touches. But Melvin Gordon, if he stays healthy, we saw it years prior, he was a top 5 running back in fantasy, and I think in this full PPR, he's an option in the passing game. He's an option in the rushing game. He's going to get touchdowns, and I know you said Le'Veon Bell's kind of in a tier of his own, but I would argue maybe Melvin Gordon's in that tier too, because I think it's very similar circumstances. People took Melvin Gordon super high last year, then he opted out, but then people were like, is he going to opt out? He's not going to opt out, and then he came back kind of disappointed, and now people are kind of going the opposite direction on him. And I think you could get a guy who has RB1 potential here in the 4th or 5th round, which is really good. And that's why I think Melvin Gordon's going to be a really good option.
Yeah, on Melvin Gordon, I have him at number 17, so I'm really not that much different from you. It's pulling just like really, really close in all these spots. And I do like Melvin Gordon this year. I'm willing to draft him. He's kind of going in that 4th round. So it's another guy. Maybe you go running back, wide receiver, and then grab Gordon. Because like I said before, I do think he is in a tier. I think Bell's in a tier of his own, but Gordon's one of my favorite backs from this next tier, which is kind of a big tier, and I think they're all kind of in the same place. But Gordon, I think his workload is going to be pretty safe. I think he's going to get well over 200 touches on the ground, and he'll add some PPR points as well because he's a pretty good receiving back. I'd argue better than Phillip Lindsay in the receiving game. Running game, I think Lindsay will take some work from him. He's going to take some touchdowns away from him. But Gordon was never really that high volume guy before, With Eckler, he's already had a really good running back also in the backfield take work from him. So this is really no different. I think Lindsay is a similarly, maybe not as good as Eckler, but I think he's pretty close. But that's why I don't even get why I don't feel that great about him. I said I like him, but why don't I have him in my top 10 if he's if his backup running back is worse than the one he used to have? Do you understand what I'm saying against there? But
yes.
I don't get why we don't feel that. Why do we not feel that good about him? I don't really get it. I like him, but I don't love him. I don't get it. I just can't bring myself to moving him up on the board.
Honestly, it's honestly because of what I said earlier was we were so high on him last year, and then you let everybody down, and now we're just kind of going the exact opposite direction. And I think, honestly, I'm looking at his receiving numbers now, and he's got like you said, he's got a worse running back behind him, especially in terms of receiving yards. So I think Gordon could be a really dynamic option receiving wise. Out of the backfield. Rushing, yes, Lindsay's going to take some touches away from Gordon, but he's still, as you mentioned there before, Lindsay's not as good as Eckler. Gordon proved he could be a top 5, top 6 running back option in fantasy when he still had a guy like Eckler who was also top 25 in his own regard. So I think Melvin Gordon is a really good pick. Kind of like you mentioned, I'd even feel confident in taking him as my clear-cut RB2, even if he's not my RB3, because I like Melvin Gordon. I think he's going to be have a good year in that solid Denver offense, like I kind of started off talking about when I started talking about Melvin Gordon. But how about you jump into your number 16 guy?
Yeah, so my number 16 guy, and these I see them in very similar situations. Both moving teams, both pretty good pass catching backs. Both get a lot of work in the red zone as well. Get a lot of touchdowns. It's Ty Gurley for me. I mean, it's really pulling hair between these two. It's super close between them. I end up with Gurley more often than I do Gordon in these mock drafts. So I don't know why. I think they're going basically in the same range. I mean, this is why, it's really close, but I do have Gurley as the tiebreaker just because he's on the better offense, and Matt Ryan's a proven guy that loves to check the ball down. I think Gurley's due for a big receiving load, and I know he's talked about maybe sitting out if the conditions aren't safe, but I think the conditions are safe, so I don't think he will sit out. I think he'll be there for camp. I think he's going to be well involved in the offense. I know it's a very high flying offense with a lot of offensive weapons, and Drew Lock's kind of hoping to be that, I guess, if that makes sense. So Gordon, I think, offers a little bit of risk if this offense is so bad and they're always playing from behind and they got to throw the ball down all the time at the end of the game. Whereas Gurley is basically matchup proof in my opinion. I think he's gonna get a lot of receptions in games they're behind. I think he's gonna get a lot of work in the running game, and he also doesn't have a very good running back behind him. Ito Smith is trash. Brian Hill's nothing that's gonna offer any resistance. Even Quandre Olson. None of these guys are guys that I'm worried about with Gurley behind him. So I think Gurley's really safe RB2, and that's why I keep taking him in drafts. him and Bell are pretty similar. I do think Bell is a little bit better of an option because he's a better player of the two of them at this point in his career. But Gurley, no slouch in terms of a running back. Just a few years ago, he was the RB1 in back-to-back seasons, and people just figured he'd do that every year. But with the knee, offers a little bit of issues, and he's been more durable than people think. He's only missed a few games in his entire career, and I think people just have a bad memory because it seems like he's always ailing because of the knee, and whether he plays or not it's always kind of a game time decision, but he ends up playing more than that. So I think Gurley is a lot safer than people are giving him credit for, and I feel pretty good about him.
Yeah, he's my number 17 guy for many of the reasons you just said. I think this Bell, Gordon, Gurley kind of tier, these guys are pretty interchangeable, although I do think I agree with you, Bell is better kind of substantially than the other two guys, but ultimately I put Gurley behind Gordon just because I'm worried about the injuries. I was also worried about whether he'd opt out or not, but now it sounds like good for us, good for fantasy owners, good for NFL fans, that it seems like NFL is taking these COVID-19 procedures and health and safety very seriously, and all comments on that have so far been pretty positive, which is really good. So hopefully Gurley does end up playing and he does stay healthy, because obviously legs, injuries, huge concern. Let a ton of fantasy owners down last year. But as you mentioned there, he was RB1, arguably one of the best fantasy players ever a couple years ago,
Right.
Which was a monster season. And I think in this good Atlanta offense, there's really not that many people behind him. Matt Ryan's a proven quarterback. I think he's really going to eat as long as he can stay on the field. If he can stay on the field, I think he has RB1 potential. But if he can't stay on the field, which as we kind of saw last year, which was kind of hard for him, I would definitely raise some concerns. That's ultimately why I had him behind Melvin Gordon, because in terms of injuries, I feel like Melvin Gordon has a little bit less of a concern. But Gurley is a guy I've also drafted in a lot of different drafts. I like him. I liked him before, and I think he's a really good RB2 option there. If you get Bell, Gordon, or Gurley, in my opinion, as your RB2, you're in really good shape. You're in really good shape because all three of those guys have legitimate RB1 potential. So I like Gurley.
This tier right here again. It just keeps reinforcing why I want to go RB early, because these are guys you can get in the fourth round. Gurley, Gordon, and Bell are all guys that are going in the fourth round, and you need to take them here. The second and third round are just littered with receivers. I mean, there's obviously some running backs in the second round. The third round mainly is just receivers and tight ends and a couple quarterbacks as well. So I think most of these guys are going to fall to the fourth, where you can take them and you can capitalize. I'm going to go into
real quick. These because the next three guys that I have on my list, I would feel kind of confident about having as my RB2, but then after that, I'm like, no thank you. So you definitely want to make sure you try and get one of those three guys. But sorry to interrupt you there. Jump into your 18.
No, you're good, man. The next guy I have is kind of a do not draft guy for me. I don't really think he's that talented of a running back. It's Leonard Fournette for me, and it's basically just because of draft price. He's going before all of these guys that we've listed before them, and that's just it's not going to happen for me. I don't feel very rosy about him, and I think there is a little bit of a tier break between Gordon and Fournette, because I really like the first three, but Fournette, they were trying to trade him away for basically a 7th round pick, and no one would even take him. So they're basically just stuck with him. Obviously, he's going to get the ball out, but he was so inefficient last year. There's no way they give him that much work again this year. If he can't get the job done early on, I think they're going to start more of an RB by committee. I know they don't really have great options behind him besides Raquel Armstead and Chris Thompson. I think they're going to eat into his work a little bit more than people are really seeing. And while I don't think he's very talented in real life, he's still an RB2 in this format. If he fall behind these guys, I'd be willing to take him. Like if he was in this order, I'd have no problem taking him there. But the fact that he's going before all of them, I'm out. I'm not going to take him before any of these guys.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a little lower on him, but he's number 20 for me. So kind of in that same tier that I mentioned a little bit earlier. I was surprised when I did some research that he was actually, let me check, 5th overall in receiving yards for a running back. Didn't have any receiving touchdowns, but that's still pretty good and a lot better than I thought it was. He also rushed for over 1,100 yards last year, mainly because of that big workload. And the Jacksonville offense, it's one of the worst in the league, obviously. So I think Fournette will still get touches even if he's not efficient. And that kind of evokes some confidence in me that he's going to be maybe a high-end RB2. But you mentioned it there. He's getting taken before guys like Bell, Gurley, Gordon. I would not take him above those guys.
No.
But if you miss out on one of those three guys, I would say you can feel confident with Fournette as a mid to low end RB2 if you have to. He's much better as an RB3. I think he's a really good option in RB3 just because he's clearly. I mean, maybe not. You could argue DJ Chark is the best option in that Jacksonville offense, but he's clearly either the first option or the second option in that Jacksonville offense. Minshew is not a great quarterback, but not an awful quarterback. So he'll be a serviceable RB2, a lot better than the guys I have below him, but definitely not better than the guys I have above him for sure. And he's for some reason being taken over some of those guys.
Yeah, I don't get it. Obviously, he does have a safe workload. I just think Chris Thompson's going to eat into that receiving work a lot more. And if he struggles in the red zone again, you're gonna be disappointed with him. It's gonna be a very similar season to Lev Bell had last season, which he actually had a pretty similar season to Lev Bell, just with more work in the receiving game. But he's not as talented as Bell in any regard. So I really see it regressing to the mean. I think he's more of a mid to back end RB2. And if you can get him as your RB3 and maybe your league's smart, they watch our video and they take all these guys before him, then you could take Fournette. I'm willing to take him there, but it's just the fact that he's going before him. That makes me just question his draft price. Why don't you go into your number 18 guy, Drew?
Yeah, so 18, I got another kind of guy that falls into that really kind of Todd Gurley tier. He's not in terms of talent, but in terms of was a really good fantasy option. They got injured and now everyone forgot who he was. It's David Johnson for me. I know he's the butt of every joke, like a lot of these guys are, because of the awful DeAndre Hopkins trade, and we won't get into that right now. But David Johnson is still a good option as long as he can stay healthy. But I think if he stays healthy, he's going to be a huge part in that offense, in my opinion. He's shown that he can be a good receiving back. He can run the ball okay. I think he's going to be a big part of that offense because now they don't have Hopkins. So I mean, Will Fuller's inevitably going to get injured at some point. If maybe you love Randall Cobb or Brandon Cooks, maybe, but I think David Johnson's still going to get some touches, going to get some touchdowns. But he's still in that kind of Fournette tier for me, where I wouldn't take him over a Gurley, a Gordon, or a Bell. And in some very few leagues, I've seen that he goes above those guys. But you can take him as a good RB3 with upside, or if you kind of have to, take him as like your mid-level RB2, low-end RB2, because I think he's gonna get some touches and gonna get some opportunities in the Houston offense now that they don't have arguably one of the best receivers in the last 10 years.
Yeah, David Johnson's at 19 for me. I feel basically the same way you do about him. He's going to be safe. This is another guy that it's going to be kind of a boring RB2, RB3 guy, but these are guys that you need on your team, a steady performer. I think where he's going to struggle is that Deshaun Watson's going to take a lot of that red zone work away from him. I don't think he's going to have very many rushing touchdowns. And then receiving game, Watson usually doesn't throw to his running backs that much. I do see David Johnson have a pretty good workload, but I don't think he's going to be a target in the red zone. I think he's going to struggle in the touchdown department, which is going to really cap his upside, and that's why I see him more as people have him kind of in that mid, even sometimes high RB2 range. I've seen him as high as like 11, 12. Yeah. And I think he's there. I think he's more of that back end RB2. And if he's my RB3, I would absolutely love it. Another guy going kind of in that 4th, 5th round area around all these other guys, but I think he's going behind them, so I'd be willing to take him. I have no problem with that.
Yeah, same thing. He's kind of like Fournette. Don't take him above like an Eckler, a Bell, a Gordon, or a Gurley. Like I kind of see it in some drafts, but you can take him there and you can feel confident as an RB3. I would also worry, I forgot to mention it there, Duke Johnson too. He's probably going to take some reception, some work out of that backfield for sure. But I still like David Johnson. I still think he's going to be a decent option for a PPR league out of that backfield. But I guess I'll jump into my number 19 guy, because your number 19 guy is David Johnson. And it is a guy that we talked about several times here. It's Kareem Hunt. I know I'm not going to go too in depth with it because I kind of mentioned it. That's why I had Nick Chubb a lot lower than you did on my list. But I'm really high on Kareem Hunt. I mean, you can get him for almost nothing. I think he's being drafted in most leagues as like an RB4 kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe kind of an RB3 in some leagues if people are high on him like I am. But I just go back to, obviously, off the field issues. I don't condone any of that because Kareem Hunt is shown in the past maybe he's not the best person in the world when it comes to doing off the field. But if we're sticking strictly to football, Kareem Hunt was one of the best running backs in terms of fantasy his first year and a half in the league in that dynamic Chiefs offense. I know Cleveland isn't Kansas City, but still, Cleveland, they got Kevin Stefanski. They're going to be a good offense, I think. Baker Mayfield, I have him projected to have a really good bounce back year. As we saw with Nick Chubb, he was really able to thrive in that offense. I think Kareem Hunt's going to take some serious touches away from Nick Chubb. He's a good pass catching back. He's a good runner. He's going to get some touchdowns. Obviously, kind of with Chubb, I worry that they're going to kind of take touches away from each other, and that's why ultimately I have Kareem Hunt lower. But I think if you can get him as your RB3, and maybe I personally wouldn't feel confident in him as my RB2 just because he might get suspended again. Who knows? But if you can get him as maybe a low-end RB2 or an RB3 for sure, I think he offers some potential low-end RB1, RB2 upside. I'm really high on Kareem Hunt as I've done some more research. I think he's going to get the touches, and I think he's going to be really good.
Yeah, on Kareem Hunt, I got him at 23, and it kind of matches up with me having Chubb a few spots ahead of you do as well. I like Hunt as well as an RB3 option for you. More of an RB4 for your team if you're going running back heavy. This could be like you take him in the 6th or 7th round because that's kind of where he's going. But he's one of my favorite picks in that round. He's a great PPR option, and you have to remember what your league format is. And if it's in half or standard, I'm not really willing. He's more of in that 30 range for me. He would not be on my list if it was either half or standard, but full PPR, he's going to get to work in the receiving game. I think he's going to get north of 50 receptions, which is going to automatically put him in as an RB3 no matter what he does on the ground. And I think he's going to get a little bit of work on the ground as well. He can add 4 or 5 touchdowns on the ground. He can be kind of like Austin Eckler light.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why, as high as I have Chubb at 9, he's on my do not draft list for a reason, because I'd rather take Kareem Hunt in the 7th round, 6th round, with the upside of Chubb going down and him being like a top 3 back. Because if he does that, he has built-in upside. He's a flex play normally, maybe low-end RB2 at most is his ceiling with Chubb there. But if Chubb goes out, he could be the number 1 running back in the league on any given week. And I am fully endorsing that pick in the 7th round. It's one of the smartest picks you can make in your draft to kind of reinforce your running back room.
Yeah, and I'm 100% with you there. I think Chubb and Hunt are going to get very similar workloads. And that's ultimately why I think I would not take Nick Chubb in the 2nd round or like the 1st round like he's doing in some drafts, but I absolutely love taking Kareem Hunt late in the draft because like in comparison to some other guys like receivers or like if you really want like Harrison Butker as your kicker, maybe take him. But I love Kareem Hunt where he's going right now, and that's why he made my list. And I look like Leonard Fournette, I can make the argument to kind of put him above Kareem Hunt, but some of these other guys that I have on my list, there's a significant tier break after this, and I love Kareem Hunt way more than a lot of these other guys. So how would you jump into your number 20 guy, though?
At number 20, I have another running back kind of in this tier. I actually kind of feel better about him where he's going than some of these other guys in front of him. It's Chris Carson for me. I think people are sleeping on him a little bit. Maybe even me with my ranking. I think I'm a little lower on him than the consensus, but I still like him this year. Another guy you can take is your RB3 and be pretty happy about it. If he's recovered from that hip injury, he's got no Rashad Penny in the backfield. I'm not worried about Carlos Hyde. I'm not worried about DJ Dallas. I think Carson's in for a big workload. It's just about the pass catching chops for him. I think he's got the ability to do it, and he proved it last year. He's not a terrible pass catcher, but he didn't get the full workload in terms of that because Rashad Penny started kind of taking off a little bit and started eating into that work a little bit more. Carson, for me, it's another guy. It's a safe RB2. I think he has a little more upside than a guy like David Johnson or Leonard Fournette, but I'm also a little worried about the hips, so that's why I have him below him. But I think I would draft Carson over a couple of these guys in front of him.
Yeah, so he's my last guy on the list at 25.
Oh, wow.
I'm a lot lower on him than you and a lot of other people. You mentioned it there. I just the workload kind of concerns me a little bit. The injuries concern me, and I just like where he's going right now in drafts. I kind of avoid him because I think he's going a little bit too high. And I know even you're lower than him on some other people, Chris. But I definitely like some other guys above him more so than him just because of the injuries and everything else that kind of goes with the Chris Carson experience. I'm kind of worried about that. But he's still a good back. And I think like last year he was really good. I had him on my fantasy team because I felt like he was going a lot lower in drafts last year. So he's a good option, but the injury, I could so envision him going like 2 or 3 weeks and then getting hurt and that's it. So I think in my opinion, he's more of like, if you get a Josh Jacobs and a Saquon as your running back duo, and then you take Chris Carson as your RB3, I would feel confident in that. But in most cases, I would feel like you're more going to have him as like your RB, like a RB3, RB4, in my opinion at least. The injuries just really scare me. I don't like that. As I kind of mentioned with Dalvin Cook earlier, Chris Carson, I just don't feel as confident that he's going to be able to stay durable, stay healthy for an entire season.
Yeah, that's fair for sure. Why don't you jump into your number 21 guy now?
So 21 guy, I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit here because it's actually 2 guys. It's the Baltimore backfield, because I feel like with these two guys, you can't really separate them. And obviously, Lamar Jackson's going to take some touches away from them because he's maybe the best rushing quarterback ever. At the same time, though, Mark Ingram was a decent, good fantasy option last year. I think he was about an RB2, RB3 last year, which is really good at this point in the draft. And I like J.K. Dobbins. He was really. Sadly, I'm a Michigan fan, and I watched him just tear us apart. It seemed like in that one game in November at Ohio State. So I like Dobbins as a runner, and I think they're both going to get a lot of opportunities in the good Baltimore offense. However, the reason I just can't separate them is because, kind of like with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, I think they're definitely going to take some touches away from each other. So I would really like if you maybe like go running back heavy early on, take some receivers, and then Dobbins and Ingram, if they're still there, because they are kind of dropping, at least in some of the drafts and rankings that I've done and I've seen. You can take them, maybe take both of them. So then whatever kind of guy booms or kind of really takes charge, in my opinion, I envision it being Dobbins. Once he gets kind of accustomed to the offense, I think he could be a really good option. But I would almost maybe want to take both of them and just kind of have them as a duo. And that's why I ultimately kind of put them together, because it was hard for me to kind of separate the two, because they both have very similar upside and very similar kind of concerns as well. Just kind of taking touches away from each other, especially early on. And also to the big elephant in the room that is Lamar Jackson and his rushing ability.
Yeah, on this duo, neither one made my top 25, but as a collection, if one of them emerges as the lead back, I mean, Mark Ingram was a top 12 back last year, I even believe. It was on the back of 5 receiving touchdowns, so he's definitely not that. He's more of the RB2 when he's by himself, but I think Dobbins has the upside for even more than that. So if either one of them emerge, they're going to be top 16 backs, in my opinion. If one of them went down with an injury right now, I'd have the other one projected inside my top 16 for sure. Other than that, I don't really have a lot to add. It's going to be whether or not one of them can either one of them gets injured, one of them takes the lead role. Other than that, I'm not really super interested in taking both of them, I guess, because I think they're going to both eat into each other, as well as Lamar Jackson, maybe with a little positive touchdown regression in that regard. My number 21 running back is David Montgomery. Maybe not the most flashy back, and people are very annoyed with what he did at the end, or with what he did last year, being kind of drafted in that like 3rd, 4th round last year. I ended up getting him like the 7th round, so I didn't really mind what he was doing for me. I kind of expected more of a flex play. He fell a lot in my draft. Montgomery this year, he's got a very safe workload. It's just him and Cohen. Obviously, Cohen's going to get his, but he's a very different running back than Montgomery. It's not. I'm not saying they're as talented, but it's kind of like Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt light. Obviously, Montgomery nowhere close to Nick Chubb in terms of talent. I'm not saying that, and neither is Cohen compared to Hunt, but it's kind of a similar situation where I think both of them have a decent amount of fantasy value. I think Montgomery is an RB2, but this is a guy you can draft very late, and this is one of my favorite picks in drafts as well. I love the 7th round. Hunt and Montgomery, basically, it's just who's there when it's on my pick. I'm fine with taking either one of them. Hunt might have a little more upside, so I may go with him if I go very running back heavy, but if I was to go maybe 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and fill like a tight end position or something like that, Montgomery is definitely my number 3 running back is what I'd like, because I think he is a locked-in RB2, back-end RB2, obviously, but I think he's got a very safe workload. I think he can put up a similar season to like Lev Bell last year, where he ends up finishing as like the RB17 or something like that, which is a little higher than I have him, but I like him this year. I really do.
Yeah, so I didn't have him on my list, but I think I had 4 guys right here that were like I almost put on my list. And honestly, after I have Fournette, I guess you have Carson, but in my opinion, after Fournette, there is like a significant tier break.
Yes.
And from 21 to like 29, like they're pretty interchangeable. So I kind of agree with everything that you said about Montgomery. He's going very late in drafts after last year going very high in drafts, if I remember correctly. And the big question mark with him is just that Chicago offense. If Nick Foles is starting, I definitely like Montgomery, but if Mitch Trubisky is starting, I don't like Montgomery as much. At the same time, though, he's currently going as like your RB4, maybe RB3 in some drafts. So I would definitely kind of take him, because a lot of guys in this range don't have the amount of upside that Montgomery had. And a lot of the reasons why people are forgetting a lot of the reasons why he was going so early in drafts last year. I mean, he's definitely got some really good potential, can catch the ball, maybe can score a little bit more in the touchdown department.
Yeah, he needs to.
I also worry, though, about Tariq Cohen, too, maybe taking some touches away from him like he did last year a little bit, but Cohen did have a really down year last year. So hopefully Montgomery can have a really big season. And if you get him as your RB3, RB4, you can't really do much worse than David Montgomery, because very few people have the amount of upside that he has.
Yeah, I think Montgomery is a safe pick here, and I really like him in that seventh round range. I'm gonna go ahead and jump into my number 22 guy, and this is a guy that is a much different player, but it's a similar kind of thing to David Montgomery last year. It's DeAndre Swift for me. I'm actually higher than him. I do not have Jonathan Taylor on my list, which I mean maybe he's on your list. I'm not sure. It's kind of similar to the Dobbins and Ingram split for him and Mac. I'm worried that he won't be able to take that job until over halfway through, and he won't finish as a top 25 back. But I think DeAndre Swift wins this job from day one because I'm worried about Kerryon Johnson as a prospect now with his back-to-back knee injuries. I think Swift wins the job, and in a PPR, he's going to get enough receptions to keep him inside the top 25. This is not a guy that I love to take in drafts. I feel like I pass on him more. I think I'd rather take Kareem Hunt. It's just I project him for a little bit more running work, at least on the ground, a couple more touchdowns on the ground. So I have Swift at 22 here. It's not my favorite pick, but it's a guy that I'd be willing to take. I'm not taking Jonathan Taylor. That's another guy that I'm kind of out on this year just because of Marlon Mack still being there. I ended up projecting him for only like 900 yards and no receiving work, so he didn't make it on my top 25 list. But Swift with the receiving work did. So I'm a little higher on the consensus, but I'm not crazy about the pick. And this is kind of why I like to go really running back heavy because I think there's still a lot of good receivers in this range where Swift is going. And I don't really like his draft price because it's actually before Montgomery. He's kind of going in that range. And I've seen him get drafted before Montgomery more often than not. And I'd much rather have Montgomery, even though I have him one spot apart.
Yeah, for sure. I have him at 23, so I'm pretty much right there with you in terms of Swift. It's kind of funny because we are Lions fans, but based on the rankings that I've seen, I think we're relatively lower on Swift than a lot of other fantasy people are. But I mentioned it there. You mentioned it there. I mean, Kerryon Johnson, if he's healthy, I definitely kind of worry that he might eat into that Swift workload, but he's probably going to get hurt again. I mean, we've seen it across his first two seasons. The guy is definitely injury prone. And kind of like I mentioned with Cook, running backs don't tend to get healthier with age. So Johnson, I'm not too worried about him. And I think Swift is still going to be a viable option if you can get him later. Like I don't like him above like Johnson, Hunt, Fournette, and he is going kind of higher than some of those guys. But if you can get him in like as your RB3, RB4, kind of like we mentioned with David Montgomery, I think he's a really good option, especially in PPR leagues. I think he can catch very well. And also I'll touch on Jonathan Taylor too. He was on kind of with Montgomery, like the guys that just narrowly missed my list, but I'm right there with you. He's going super early in drafts.
Yeah, he is. I don't get it.
About it because like he was a beast at Wisconsin, obviously, but Marlon Mack's still there. No off season. I'm a little worried about Jonathan Taylor because honestly, I think in terms of NFL talent, I think J.K. Dobbins is and Swift are a little bit more talented than Jonathan Taylor. He's much more of kind of like a downhill type of running back. So if Taylor is available there late in the rounds, take a chance on him. But I Swift a little bit more than him for sure. But jumping to my number 22 pick, unless you had anything about Swift, is a guy, Terry. I think he can get some pass catching opportunities there in that Buffalo offense. I mean, he had a good season last year, but like kind of take that even rushing ability will probably take some touchdowns away from Devin Singletary, but I still think he's a good pass catching back. Honestly, not too much more to say about him. I think in this kind of range, you're kind of just taking what you get. A lot of these guys, kind of the same concerns, workload, but they could be really good. They could be really bad. But I think Singletary is a decent option if you're looking for like an RB3, RB4.
Yeah, I have. I'll go ahead and put Singletary down at my number 24 spot because I think Singletary is a very safe RB3 as well. I do think he's being a little bit overdrafted though. He's going kind of before these guys in front of him, and I don't really see that. But with Singletary, I think he's a very talented back. I had him last year actually, and I was happy to have him. He was kind of like he was like my fifth running back, which I got him off the waiver wire, and he was constantly in and out of my lineup, for Barkley and Bell missing some weeks, even Gordon early in the season. So he was kind of in there all throughout. But he did go down with that injury early in the season that kind of hindered his ability to really step up to the plate as a running back early in the season. But in the second half, he broke out. And I think he still has a very good chance to be good. It's just my worries are Josh Allen taking away touchdowns, and then now they added Zach Moss going to that Frank Gore role. I was really excited when they got rid of Frank Gore because I thought Singletary would get the get the bell cow roll, and he'd probably be in my top 12 if he did. But with Zach Moss there now, I think Moss drafting him in the third round, I believe, is where they took him. He's going to eat into the workload a little bit, and I think Moss he's in like my 35-ish range, so not really anywhere near my really fantasy relevant running backs, but he's definitely going to eat into some work, and I'm a little worried about that.
Yeah, and that's why Singletary, I think, is a decent RB3 option. But you're right. Some people are taking him in that RB2 range, which kind of confuses me a little bit. But he's a good option. You mentioned it there, too. He was like a big kind of waiver wire ad guy, I remember last year. So don't reach on him. Like if a guy like Kareem Hunt's still there, even DeAndre Swift, I think, has a little bit more upside than Singletary. But I think they're very kind of similar in terms of upside. Singletary could be a really good option in a very improved Buffalo offense, as they added Stephon Diggs, and I think he could be a good player, good fantasy option. But yeah, not like I said, not too much to add. But I'll jump into my 24 guy, the last guy on my list. And it is a guy who was huge last year down the stretch, and it's Raheem Mostert. Again, very similar. We're going to sound like a broken record here, but he could have the options there and a really, really good San Francisco offense, a really good play caller there, and Kyle Shanahan is the head coach. And I think if you can get him in this RB2, RB3, RB4 range, I think you could definitely maybe even have a potential to have an RB2 type of talent there. Last year, I know it was mainly Tevin Coleman was a decent, relevant fantasy player, and I think Raheem Mostert's going to take a lot of the touches that Coleman previously had. But again, if you want to go receivers in this round, this kind of range, because I think you can get some quality receivers that I feel more confident about than Raheem Mostert, definitely do that, because I think you can wait and get a guy that maybe is very similar to Mostert a little bit later on. So definitely don't try to reach on Mostert, but I still think he's a decent RB3, RB4 option.
Yeah, Mostert didn't make my list, but like you said about some of your options, he was very close for me. Mostert, the problem with him is he's just not a pass catcher, and I'm worried that there's going to be a big timeshare between him and Tevin Coleman. Geez. Yeah. Worried. I think I have Coleman inside my top 30 as well. I think they're both really close to each other. So I have more on the opinion that they're going to really split the workload up, especially in a PPR, because Coleman's a little bit of a better pass catcher. So I think in standard, there's a bigger gap, and Mostert would easily be within my top 25, maybe even in my top 20, because I have him over 1,000 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns, which would get him into that top 20 at least, but just no pass catching work, and that really worries me for him. Very efficient last year. I think that's going to come down a little bit, but he's a good running back. I mean, he could definitely finish as a top 25 back, but I'm a little lower on him than the consensus I'd say. I'd say he's right around my 25-30 range. So going to my last pick, and it's a guy that I do like, and I think he has a lot of upside, and he's proven that he could be a top 10 back. I mean, in that really fluky season where he took over as the running back before the season even started because of a major holdup of Le'Veon Bell, it's James Conner for me. I know the injury concerns are real for him. There's no doubt about it, and I am fully aware of that. But I like Conner in this spot. You know, he's going a little bit earlier than I like, but I think that's kind of an expert league. I think in standard leagues, he's going to be forgotten about, or in your home league, he's going to be forgotten about. And he's got the PPR bump too. I think he's a very good pass catcher. I think he still has the backfield, not to himself, but I think he has the majority role. I mean, I don't really like any of the other options. I mean, Benny Snell's whatever. Anthony McFarland's a good back, but he's more of that scat back, the guy that's going to catch a couple passes and he's going to be electric. But I think Connor's still the workhorse back. And if he can stay healthy, he's going to finish ahead of top 25. If he's healthy for 15 to 16 games, he's going to be a top 16 back, probably a solid RB2. It's still the injury concerns for me. And I have him projected for about 900 yards and 7 touchdowns, and then about 50. So like that's not a terrible workload. I think besides injury, he's a safe bet to be a pretty good running back and could be an RB2 for you. It's just the injury concerns are very real. One of the riskier picks on there just because of injury.
Yeah, he was my number 26 guy. So if we had one more spot, I would have put James Conner there. For pretty much every reason you said. I don't love where he's going because he is kind of going a little bit high in at least some of the drafts that I've done. But if you can get him in like this RB3, RB4 range, like you said, he is RB2, maybe even low end RB1 potential. If Roethlisberger stays healthy and the Pittsburgh offense can be kind of good. I do have some concerns with their offense. I'm not 100% sold on Ben Roethlisberger having the season of his life. A lot of people think he will, but if Conner can stay healthy, he's going to get options. He's going to get touches regardless. He's going to score some touchdowns, and we've seen him be a really good fantasy player in the past. And honestly, now that I'm kind of looking at this list, I think I maybe would put Carson and Conner over probably Mostert and maybe even Singletary and the Dobbins Ingram duo. But yeah, I like James Conner, and if you can get him as your RB3, RB4, very few guys in that range, as we've kind of said with the last few guys, are going to have the amount of potential that Conner has. But injuries are a huge concern when it comes to Conner, and I think Jalen Samuels too might take some touches away from him.
Yeah, that's true.
Well.
This was a good list. It was a good time. I really enjoyed it. We had some differing opinions, but we were on the same page for the most part.
Yeah, it felt like that. I was worried because like our first kind of 3, 4, 5 actually were like really similar, and then we kind of like 6 through like 14 was kind of, we had different things, and then we kind of separated again, and then we kind of came back together. So I think it just kind of shows that like that 21 to like 29 range is really just kind of a crapshoot.
Yeah.
And I would advise trying to maybe draft some RB heavy like early on, and then take receivers there, because there's still some like quality receivers that you can get in that kind of Singletary Swift kind of range, and we don't have to worry about whether Singletary will be as good as he was last year, or Mostert will be as good as he was down the stretch. Will Swift kind of live up to the potential? So that's kind of the big thing that I learned when making this list and discussing with you is there is a significant drop off after like Leonard Fournette at number 20.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more there. I'm sure we'll do more of these rankings before the season comes out, but I'd just like to mention that we're going to get back into the NFL previews. We're just waiting for the opt-outs to all happen. We're trying to get everything right, making sure the NFL season's all in order. But we're going to try to shoot some of those out pretty rapidly so we can get it done. We still got some divisions to work on that I'm very excited to talk about. And we've been a lot of offense because we've been talking about fantasy lately, but we can't forget about these some of these defensive moves. Like that big safety and Jamal Adams leaving. So I'm get back to some of these division talks. And that'll be one that comes up soon, the NFC West. Very excited to talk about that.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do a fantasy defenses, what defense you should draft to. Maybe we'll do an episode about that. Just kidding. That'll be super boring. But yeah, like Chris said, we got a lot of fun stuff going on. We'll probably also do some NBA bubble, like we did an episode last week on that. We'll probably do some NBA bubble talk and predictions whether the play-in tournament happens or not. So it's a really fun time to be a sports fan again, because sports are finally coming back. But unless you have anything else to add, Chris, we're the Zone Defense Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to YouTube, follow us on Spotify, Twitter, and Instagram. And we have a ton of episodes, NFL, NBA episodes already up on the channel. And like we alluded to there, we're going to have a ton more up in the coming weeks. So be sure to check those out. And thanks for listening to this episode.
Peace.